1,000 battles cannot change the truth. Humans are weak. But even as she spoke, her heart beat faster. She saw the look in Varen's eyes. She heard the tremble in his voice when he said the word defiance. That word, more than any, stayed in her mind. That night, the queen stood on her balcony, looking out at the stars. The galaxy stretched endless before her. Somewhere out there, humans were preparing for the next fight. She whispered to herself, too softly for anyone to hear, "Let them come. I will see their weakness with my own eyes." For the first time in years, the queen felt something she had not known since her youth. A spark of doubt, buried under layers of pride. She told herself it was nothing, but deep inside, she feared the truth. Perhaps the humans were not as weak as she had always believed. And so, the stage was set. The queen, proud and unshaken, prepared to crush a species she thought beneath her. Yet fate was already moving, ready to show her a battle that would change everything she believed. The challenge. The alien queen sat in her war chamber, a wide circular hall where maps of stars floated in the air like burning lights. Around her stood generals, advisors, and commanders, their faces filled with unease. They had returned from the front lines with news she did not want to hear. Humans were still standing. "Enough of these excuses," the queen said, her voice sharp like steel. "You tell me humans are weak, yet you cannot break them. Why do I see half my warriors return instead of all?" No one dared to answer. The silence was heavy, pressing down on every soldier in the room. Finally, General Varen, scarred and proud, raised his head. "My queen, they are not strong in body," he admitted, "but their minds, their will is fire. They fight as if every battle is their last. They refuse to surrender." The queen's silver eyes narrowed. She rose slow, lie from her throne and walked to the center of the chamber. The floating star maps shifted around her, showing the human settlements, their defenses glowing like sparks in the dark galaxy. She raised her hand and the map zoomed in on a single point, a human stronghold. "They refuse to surrender?" she repeated softly, almost like a whisper. Then her voice grew louder, echoing in the chamber. "Then I will make them kneel. If my soldiers fail, then I will not." The generals gasped. The queen herself going to battle? It was unthinkable. For centuries, no ruler had stepped onto the battlefield, but the queen's pride was wounded. She would not let a species she believed to be weak shame her empire. "You will prepare my flagship," she commanded. "I will lead the next campaign. I will show the galaxy what happens when humans stand against me." Her court bowed low, though their eyes betrayed their fear. If the queen went to war, the galaxy itself would tremble. Days later, the queen's fleet gathered in the void of space, 1,000 ships shaped like black daggers surrounding her flagship, the Crown of Stars. The vessel was larger than a city, its hull glowing with power. Inside, soldiers sharpened their weapons and whispered of the humans they would face. The queen stood at the viewing deck, gazing out at the stars. She remembered the stories, humans setting fire to their own fields to trap her warriors, humans standing side by side until the last moment. Strange creatures, she thought, fragile, yet burning with something she could not name. "Soon," she whispered, "I will see this strength with my own eyes, and I will break it." Her fleet descended toward the human stronghold. On the planet's surface, humans prepared. Their walls were simple, their weapons crude compared to the alien empire's advanced machines. Yet their soldiers stood tall, ready to fight. At their front was the human commander, a man whose name carried across battlefields like thunder. The queen's eyes focused on him through the war screens. He wore no crown, no glowing armor, yet his men looked at him as if he carried the light of 1,000 suns. The queen frowned. Why did they follow him so fiercely? When the signal was given, the skies burned. Alien ships unleashed fire upon the ground. Explosions tore through the human defenses, yet the humans did not run. They charged forward, their weapons blazing, their voices loud with war cries. From the safety of her flagship, the queen watched, her heart steady but her mind strangely unsettled. Every time a human fell, another rose to take their place. Every time a wall broke, they built another line with their own bodies. She saw the commander moving through the chaos, fighting not from behind, but at the very front, his sword flashing with fire. The queen's generals cheered as alien machines crushed human lines, but the queen did not smile. Her eyes stayed locked on the commander. He fought like no soldier she had ever seen. He did not fight for himself, but for the people beside him. That fire in his eyes, that strange light, made even her proud heart falter for a moment. Strange, she murmured to herself. Why do I feel challenged? The battle stretched into the night. The humans should have fallen quickly, but they held on. Their defenses bent, but did not break. Alien soldiers grew tired, frustrated at the endless resistance. The Queen's pride began to harden into something else, curiosity. At last, she rose from her throne and spoke to her guards. Prepare my armor. If these humans will not kneel to soldiers, they will kneel to their queen. Her court gasped again, but none dared to stop her. The queen stepped into her war armor, black and shining, a suit built from rare metals stronger than any blade. She took her spear, its edge glowing with deadly light, and boarded a landing craft. As the vessel cut through the night sky, her soldiers knelt in fear and awe. Their queen was descending into battle. The landing craft slammed onto the battlefield. The ground shook as the queen stepped out, her armor gleaming under the fire-lit sky. Human soldiers froze at the sight of her. Tall, proud, unshaken, she looked like a goddess of war. She raised her spear and pointed at the human commander. Her voice thundered across the battlefield. "You," she shouted, "I am queen of this empire. Show me your strength, if humans truly have any. I challenge you here, in front of both our armies." The battlefield fell silent. The humans looked at their commander. He tightened his grip on his blade, his eyes meeting the queen's. Slowly he stepped forward, and in that moment, the true challenge began. The first clash. The battlefield fell into silence when the alien queen pointed her glowing spear at the human commander. For a brief moment, even the fires seemed to stop crackling, and both armies stared in disbelief. No ruler had ever stepped onto the field in living memory, yet here she stood, armored in black steel, her crown shining like fire, her voice echoing across the night. The human commander did not flinch. He stepped forward slowly, his boots sinking into the mud. His armor was dented, scratched, and far less advanced than hers. Yet his grip on the sword was steady, and his eyes burned with calm fire. His men shouted for him to stay back, to let others protect him, but he raised one hand, silencing them. "This fight is mine," he said. His voice was quiet, but it carried across the lines like thunder. The queen tilted her head, studying him. She had expected fear in his face, trembling in his steps. Instead, she saw defiance. Instead, she saw something she could not name. "Come then," she said, her voice like cold wind. "Show me this human strength you boast of." The two leaders clashed in the center of the battlefield. Her spear struck, first moving faster than any eye could follow. The commander raised his sword, sparks flying as metal met metal. The sound of the strike echoed, and soldiers on. Both sides gasped. The queen was taller, stronger, and her armor was forged from the rarest ores of her empire. Every strike of her spear could shatter stone. Yet the human did not fall. He blocked, stepped aside, and countered. His movements were not wild but measured, every strike made with purpose. The queen snarled as she pushed forward, her spear glowing with power. She swept it low, aiming to cut him in half, but the commander leaped back just in time. The tip of the weapon carved a deep scar into the earth instead of flesh. For the first time in years, the queen felt her blood heat. This was no game, no weak prey. This was battle. Around them, both armies had stopped fighting. Alien soldiers stood frozen in shock, watching their queen test herself against a human. Human soldiers stood in silence, hearts pounding as they saw their leader face a goddess of war. All eyes were fixed on the center, where two destinies collided. The queen pressed harder, her attacks faster, sharper, filled with pride and fury. The commander met her every strike, his blade moving with strength born not from power, but from resolve. Sweat ran down his face, but his eyes never wavered. "You fight well, for a human," the queen hissed as their weapons locked together. Sparks lit their faces. "But you cannot win. You will fall, and your people will follow." The commander gritted his teeth and pushed back with all his strength. "You are wrong," he said firmly. "Even if I fall, my people will rise. That is the strength you cannot understand." Those words cut her deeper than any blade. For a moment, she faltered. Her empire had always followed her out of fear, out of obedience. But these humans, they followed their leader out of something else, something stronger. The queen roared and spun her spear in a deadly arc. The human barely dodged, the weapon grazing his side, leaving blood on his armor. His men gasped, but he stood tall, ignoring the pain. With a cry, he struck back, his blade slicing across the queen's shoulder. Her armor sparked, the metal denting for the first time in years. Gasps erupted from both armies. The queen staggered one step, her pride wounded as much as her flesh. She had been struck by a human. Her fury blazed. She unleashed a storm of strikes, her spear glowing like a storm of fire. The commander was pushed back, his boots digging trenches in the dirt. He blocked, deflected, rolled, and rose again, his body trembling from the force of her blows. Any normal man would have fallen by now, but he refused. Every time he was struck down, he rose. Every time his knees shook, he straightened. The queen's rage grew, but beneath it, another feeling stirred: respect. The battle raged until the ground itself was torn apart by their clash. Finally, both paused, breathing heavily, their weapons lowered for only a moment as they studied each other. The queen's silver eyes locked on the commander's steady gaze. She felt something she had not known in years, a thrill, a challenge that made her blood run hot. She had fought countless warriors, but none like this, none who looked at her not as a goddess, not as a monster, but as an equal. Her lips curved into a smile, sharp and dangerous. "You are no ordinary human," she said softly. The commander wiped the blood from his mouth and raised his sword again. "And you are no untouchable queen." The silence broke as both armies roared, aliens shouting in fear and awe, humans cheering in hope and fire. The clash had become more than a duel. It was a symbol, a battle between belief and truth, pride and defiance. And deep inside, the queen began to realize something terrifying. The humans were not weak. They were something far more dangerous. They were strong in ways her empire had never understood. The next strike would decide more than victory. It would decide the future of the galaxy. The human secret. The alien queen stood on the torn battlefield, her spear glowing faintly in the smoke. The duel with the human commander had left her unsettled. His blade had touched her armor. His resolve had matched her strength, and his eyes had not wavered even once. That was not supposed to happen. She had expected fear, collapse, and surrender. Instead, she had found something else, something strange and dangerous. The human commander, though bleeding, did not step back. His men rallied around him, forming a protective circle as alien soldiers tried to surge forward. But with just a single gesture of his hand, the human stood taller, refusing to retreat. The queen narrowed her eyes. What power held them together like this? It was not fear. She could see that clearly. It was not blind obedience either. It was something she had never understood. "Why do they follow you so?" she demanded, her voice carrying across the flames. "What is it that makes these weak bodies rise again and again, even when death stares them in the face?" The commander's breath was heavy, his sword dripping with his own blood. Yet when he looked at her, his gaze was steady, calm, like the earth before a storm. "They follow me," he said, "because I fight for them, not for power, not for a throne, but for their lives, for their children, for their future." The queen froze. His words struck deeper than steel. For her empire, soldiers fought because they had no choice. They obeyed because disobedience meant death. But here, she saw something different. These humans did not fight for fear. They fought for love, for hope, for something greater than themselves. Her generals shouted from behind, urging her to give the signal for overwhelming firepower, to crush the humans with machines and bombs. But the queen lifted her hand and silenced them. No, she wanted to see more. She wanted to understand this strange force that gave fragile humans such terrifying strength. "Then show me," she said to the commander. "Show me this power you speak of." The commander gave a weary nod. He turned, signaling to his soldiers. And what happened next shocked the queen more than any battle. The humans, though wounded and exhausted, began to move with perfect unity, not because of orders barked in fear, but because they trusted the man standing beside them. They moved like one body, one will. They formed a shield wall with their broken armor, standing shoulder to shoulder. They raised weapons, though their hands shook with pain. And when the alien army charged, they met them with unyielding strength. Every strike, every defense, was not for themselves alone, but for the comrade at their side. If one man fell, another filled his place without hesitation. If one woman was wounded, another shielded her back. The queen's heart pounded. This was the secret. This was the strength that no machine, no empire could create. Humans fought not as individuals, but as a family, a tribe, a single beating heart. The commander himself fought at the very front, his sword rising and falling with precise strikes. The queen watched him closely. His armor cracked, His face was stained with blood, but he never gave up ground, and every time he swung his blade, his soldiers cheered, their spirits ignited by his presence. The queen felt a strange stirring in her chest, something between anger and admiration. She was the most powerful being of her empire, yet she had never inspired her people in this way. Her soldiers obeyed her, yes, but none looked at her with the burning devotion these humans gave their leader. Impossible, she whispered to herself. No ruler can command loyalty like this. But even as she said it, she knew it was not loyalty at all. It was trust. It was belief. As the battle raged, the COO, Amanda, was struck by a blast from an alien weapon. He fell to his knees, smoke rising from his chest plate. The queen leaned forward, expecting his men to break without him. Instead, something even stranger happened. His soldiers shouted his name, their voices rising like thunder. They fought harder, fiercer, as if his fall had lit a fire in their hearts. Two men dragged him back to his feet, and though his body trembled, he raised his sword again. The humans roared, their spirits soaring at the sight. The queen felt her pride cracking. How could such a frail body carry such will? How could such weakness turn into strength so powerful that even her seasoned warriors faltered before it? When at last the humans forced the aliens back a step, the queen raised her hand, halting the fight. Her army stopped instantly, confused. She stepped forward, lowering her spear, her silver eyes fixed on the bloodied commander. "You," she said slowly, almost with awe. "You should have fallen long ago. Yet you stand. You bleed, yet you rise. What are you, human?" The commander gave her a tired smile, his chest rising and falling with pain. "I am nothing alone. But with my people, I am everything." The queen's breath caught in her throat. She had never heard such words. In her empire, strength came from fear, from control, from the throne. But here stood a man who drew his strength not from power, but from unity. And deep inside her proud heart, a whisper came unbidden. "Perhaps this is the strength my empire will never know." That night, as fires smoldered across the battlefield, the queen returned to her flagship in silence. Her generals praised her presence, claiming it terrified the humans. But the queen knew better. It was not her that the humans feared. It was her that feared them. For the first time in her reign, the queen lay awake, the human commander's words echoing in her mind. "With my people, I am everything." And she realized with a chill that this was not the end of the fight. It was only the beginning, the turning point. The queen had returned to her flagship, but her thoughts were not calm. The duel still burned in her memory. She had fought humans before, crushed them without effort, yet this commander and his soldiers were different. Their unity had shaken her. Their will had defied her. For the first time in her reign, she questioned herself. But a queen could not show weakness. The very next morning, she summoned her generals and announced with a cold voice, "We end this war tonight. I will see the humans crushed by dawn." Her fleet thundered across the sky, black ships blotting out the stars. On the ground, the human stronghold prepared for its final stand. The commander knew they were outnumbered, knew the alien empire had weapons his people could never match. Yet he stood tall, gathering his soldiers and townsfolk together. "We do not fight for survival alone," he told them, his voice carrying through the smoky air. "We fight for each other, for our homes, for the children yet to come. If we fall as one. And if we win," he raised his sword, battered but shining in the firelight, "then even the queen herself will know the strength of humankind." The humans roared, their voices echoing across the night. The battle began with fury. Alien war machines advanced, their weapons scorching the earth. Walls crumbled under fire, shields shattered, and explosions lit the sky. Yet the humans did not scatter. They held line after line, retreating only to regroup, turning every broken wall into another defense. The queen watched from above, her silver eyes narrowed. She saw something her generals could not. Every time a human fell, another rose in their place. Their strength did not fade, it grew. Their pain became fuel, their losses became fire. "Impossible," she whispered, her pride cracking like glass. But her generals laughed, certain of victor. "You're my queen, their defenses are nearly gone. One last push and they are finished." The queen said nothing. Inside, she felt something she had never felt before, doubt mixed with fear. On the battlefield, the human commander led from the front again. His side was wrapped in bandages, blood staining his armor, yet he refused to stay back. He ran with his soldiers, his voice urging them forward. Where he stood, the line held. Where he charged, the line advanced. Alien soldiers, who had once mocked humans as weak prey, now trembled when they saw him. They whispered among themselves, wondering how such a fragile creature could fight like a storm. At one point, the Queen's elite guards broke through the human ranks, towering warriors with blades longer than a man's height. They rushed toward the commander, confident they would end him, but his soldiers surrounded him, forming a shield around their leader. They blocked, they bled, they died, yet none let the commander fall. And when the dust cleared, it was the Queen's elite who lay broken, not the humans. The Queen's lips parted in shock. Her strongest warriors, trained for decades, had been defeated not by strength but by loyalty. "This is their secret," she murmured. "This is what makes them dangerous." The battle raged deep into the night. Both armies were exhausted, but neither side yielded. Smoke choked the air, fire painted the sky, and the ground was soaked with blood. Finally, the Queen herself descended once more, unwilling to let her empire fail. She strode onto the battlefield in her black armor, her spear glowing brighter than ever. Her soldiers roared at the sight of her, their courage restored. "End this now," she commanded, her voice like thunder. But when she charged, the humans did not run. They closed ranks around their commander, lifting broken shields, broken swords, anything they had left. The Queen's spear struck like lightning, yet every time she thrust, a human stood in her way, protecting their leader. One by one they fell. None retreated. At last, the commander himself stepped forward, his sword raised. The Queen struck, but he blocked again, their weapons locking in the firelit dark. For a heartbeat, their eyes met. And in that moment, the Queen saw something that froze her heart. She saw herself reflected in his eyes, not as a goddess of war, not as an untouchable ruler, but as a rival who could bleed, who could lose. The turning point came suddenly. The humans unleashed a trap, trenches filled with hidden fire, ignited as alien machines advanced. Explosions ripped through the battlefield, throwing the Queen's soldiers into chaos. For the first time, the alien army stumbled back. The commander raised his sword high, his voice hoarse but strong. "Now, drive them back!" The humans charged with everything they had left. Their cries shook the ground, their will breaking through the alien line like a storm. For the first time, the Queen's army fell into retreat. The Queen staggered back, her spear dripping with human blood, her pride shattered. She had come to prove humans weak, but instead, she had witnessed the impossible. Against her empire, against her might, against her very presence, the humans had not only survived, they had turned the tide. As her soldiers dragged her back to the safety of her lines, the Queen whispered to herself, her voice trembling, "They should have fallen, they should have broken, but they rise." The humans stood on the battlefield, battered, bloodied, and nearly broken. Yet they raised their swords high, their voices chanting in victory. And in that moment, the galaxy itself seemed to shift. The weak had defied the strong, the prey had wounded the predator, and the Queen knew nothing would ever be the same again. The Queen's defeat. The Queen had never known fear. She had walked through 100 battles, crushed dozens of worlds, and burned civilizations to ash. Her empire had always seen her as untouchable, a goddess of war. But tonight, standing on the broken battlefield against humans, she felt something she had not felt in centuries. Doubt. Her army had stumbled back for the first time. Her elite had been broken. The humans, bloody and exhausted, still stood tall. Their commander, wounded but unbroken, glared at her like an equal. And that glare stung more than his sword ever had. The Queen's pride would not allow retreat. She lifted her spear high, shouting across the battlefield, "This ends now! Humans will kneel, or they will die where they stand!" Her army roared, gathering strength again. The Queen charged, black armor glowing like fire, spear aimed at the human commander. The ground shook under her steps. The commander stepped forward, his soldiers shouting his name. His blade trembled in his grip, his body weak with wounds. Yet his eyes were steady. He did not move away. He moved closer. Their weapons clashed once again, sparks tearing through the dark. The Queen struck with all the fury of her empire, every blow powerful enough to shatter stone. The commander blocked with everything he had left, his sword shaking under the weight of her strikes. "You cannot win," she shouted, her voice echoing like thunder. "I don't need to win," he replied, pushing back with trembling arms. "I just need to stand." Those words pierced her pride. She roared and unleashed a flurry of strikes, each one faster and heavier than the last. The commander was driven back, his knees buckling. His men cried out, but he lifted his sword again and again, refusing to fall. Finally, the queen struck a crushing blow that threw him to the ground. His sword clattered away, his chest plate cracked. He lay in the dirt, gasping for air. The queen raised her spear, ready to deliver the final strike. Victory was in her hands. She would prove humans were weak. But then it happened. The human soldiers surged forward, throwing themselves between their fallen commander and the queen's spear. They raised shields, swords, even bare hands to protect him. One after another fell under her strikes, but they did not scatter. They refused to let her pass. "Move aside!" she screamed, her voice cracking with fury. But they did not. Even as they died, they held the line. Even as blood stained the ground, they stood over their commander's body, forming a wall of flesh and steel. The queen froze, her spear trembling in her hand. Never in her life had she seen soldiers fight this way. Not for power, not for glory, not for fear. They fought for him, and as the commander slowly rose to his knees, coughing blood but still alive, the queen's chest tightened. This was not weakness. This was strength beyond anything she had ever known. Her spear felt heavy now. She hesitated just for a breath, and in that hesitation, the commander's hand closed around his sword once more. With a cry that shook the battlefield, he rose, battered but unbroken, and swung. The blade struck her spear, shattering its glowing tip into sparks. The shockwave rippled through the field. Both armies gasped in disbelief. The queen staggered back, staring at the broken weapon in her hand. For the first time, her power had been defied. The commander pointed his sword at her, his voice hoarse but strong. "This battle is over. Go back to your throne, queen. Today, humans stand." Silence followed. Her soldiers looked at her, waiting for command. The humans stood firm, their breaths heavy, their eyes burning. The queen lowered her broken spear. Her body trembled, not from weakness but from realization. She had not been defeated by strength of arms. She had been defeated by something far greater, human will. She could order her fleet to burn the battlefield, to kill everyone in a wave of fire. She had the power. But as she looked at the humans, at the commander who still stayed, despite wounds that should have killed him, she felt her heart tighten. Killing them would not erase her defeat. It would only prove her fear. Slowly, the queen turned away. Her soldiers gasped. Some protested, begging her not to retreat, but she silenced them with a single glance. "Enough," she said. Her voice was cold, but her heart was heavy. "We leave." The alien army pulled back, ships rising into the night sky. The humans collapsed in relief, their cheers weak but filled with victory. The commander sank to his knees, surrounded by his men, who lifted him with pride. They had survived. They had stood against an empire, and won. On her flagship, the queen stood at the viewing window, watching the human world grow smaller as her fleet retreated. Her pride was shattered. Her crown felt heavier than ever. She whispered to herself, words only she could hear. "Humans are not weak. They are stronger than we will ever be." And though her throne awaited her, though her empire still saw her as invincible, the queen knew the truth. On that battlefield, she had been defeated. Not by a blade, not by an army, but by the unbreakable spirit of humanity. A changed queen. The queen returned to her empire in silence. Her fleet had withdrawn, her soldiers confused, her generals whispering behind closed doors. No one dared to ask why she had stopped the war. They only saw her as cold and untouchable, the same ruler she had always been. But inside, the queen was no longer the same. Alone in her chambers, she removed her black armor piece by piece. For the first time in years, her hands trembled. She stared at her reflection in the silver mirror. She no longer saw the proud goddess of war. She saw a woman who had been bested, not by weapons or armies, but by something far greater. She whispered to herself, the words tasting bitter on her tongue, "Humans are not weak." That truth haunted her. Her council demanded explanations. "Why did you retreat, my queen?" one general asked. "We had numbers, we had weapons. Why not finish tea?" "Ham?" The queen's gaze turned sharp, silencing him. "Finish them? Tell me, general, did you not see? Even when they bled, they stood. Even when they should have fallen, they rose. And when I broke their commander, their people lifted him back to his feet. Tell me, how do you defeat those who refuse to die?" Her generals exchanged uneasy glances. Some wanted to argue, but none dared. For the first time, their queen spoke with something they had never heard in her voice. Respect. Days passed, yet the queen could not sleep. At night, she dreamt of the human commander's eyes, steady and unyielding. She remembered his words, "With my people, I am everything." They echoed in her mind, louder than the cheers of her victories, sharper than the cries of her defeated enemies. Her empire had been built on fear, on obedience, on chains. Soldiers followed her because they had no choice. But the humans, they followed because they believed. That was the difference. That was the strength she could never command. One evening, she walked alone into the Hall of Ancestors, where statues of old rulers stood tall. Their stone eyes stared down at her, carved with pride and cruelty. They had taught her that fear was the only way to rule. They had taught her that weakness should be crushed. But now, standing before their cold faces, she spoke aloud. "You were wrong. Strength is not in fear. It is not in obedience. It is in unity. It is in trust." Her voice echoed through the empty hall, as if the ancestors themselves were listening. And for the first time, she felt the weight of her crown, not as a symbol of power, but as a chain. News spread across the galaxy of the humans' victory. Worlds whispered of the battle where the alien queen had faced them and pulled back. Many refused to believe it. Others laughed, calling it rumor. But those who had seen it with their own eyes knew the truth. The humans were no longer prey. Even within her empire, soldiers spoke in hushed tones of the human commander who had stood against their queen.